Good afternoon all and welcome. My name is Anna Rowinska and I am your technical host today. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Straight Talk on Mental Wellness at Work. If you are having trouble hearing, please click on the bottom left where you see the microphone. Click on the up arrow where you can select the various auto controls. Although your microphone is not enabled, you can ask questions at any time through the Q&A icon. Thank you to those of you who pre-submitted your questions as well. Please use the comment section to chat with other attendees, provide your thoughts, and let us know where you are from. We will invite our panel to respond to as many questions as we can during today's session. Our moderator today is Lisa McGuire, founder and CEO of the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC. Welcome, Lisa.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining our session today. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you from our office here in Chilliwack on the unceded territories of the Stolo people, part of the Coast Salish region of southwestern British Columbia. For those who don't know us, the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC is a not-for-profit health and safety association for manufacturers and food processors. Please call us for answers to any health and safety question you may have, or visit us online for training, resources, and information on the Occupational Safety Standard of Excellence core certification for manufacturing. In our March Town Hall, we shared our 3-year plan to help the manufacturing industry work towards building stronger, psychologically safe workplaces. Today, we're continuing the conversation on this important topic together with our panel to discuss the impact of mental health issues inside our businesses and dive into some practical steps we can take to support mental wellness at work. I'm pleased to introduce our expert and industry panelists today. Dr. Merv Gilbert is a director at Vancouver Psych Health and Safety Limited, a consulting group providing services that enable organizations to foster psychologically healthy employees and workplace climates. He is a primary participant in the development, evaluation, and dissemination of resources for workplace mental health. He and his partner are also working to build an important resource for the Alliance that will help us select the most relevant psychological health and safety focused resources and training for the manufacturing industry that will be shaped into an online library later this year. Welcome, Merv.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Great to be here.
Thank you. Joining us from Abbotsford, Kelly Hammer is the Human Resource Manager at FlexiForce, a leading international manufacturer of hardware and accessories for residential and commercial overhead doors. Welcome, Kelly. And Robin Ambrose is the VP of People and Wellness at clean eating, spice mix, and wholesome meal kit producer, Epicure, in the company's North Sanish manufacturing facility. Welcome, Robin.
Hi.
Thank you all for joining us. The notable increase in workplace mental health claims over the past several years is just one indication of how more businesses are experiencing the impact of psychological factors on employee safety, well-being, and productivity at work. Starting with you, Kelly, can you talk about some of the ways that an employee's personal mental health struggles can impact their work and the rest of the team?
Yes, thank you, Lisa, for having me join the discussion. At FlexiForce, we're all still learning a lot together as it pertains to mental health and psychological safety at work. And although we've had a variety of situations to manage, we're certainly not experts in the topic. Personal struggles really show up in various different ways and are different for everyone. So really our policies recognize that mental health is about psychological and emotional well-being. And let's face it, emotions show up in the workplace every day somehow. It doesn't always mean that someone's suffering with an illness or having a mental health crisis. They might just be having some initial anxiety or some stress, something regarding a family situation, and now it's affecting their attendance. Generally, increased absenteeism, lower productivity, and significant behavior changes are the warning signs that we look for and try to manage. We like to keep an open line of communication and build relationships with people, and our attendance program encourages people to recover at work no matter what the situation is. The impact to employees and the employer are significant, and cost to the employee if they have no sick time or extended leave options. Cost to the employer, we're spending time managing issues instead of the business. And of course, then there's the impact to the team and everybody around them as well.
Thank you, Kelly. I mean, absolutely, bringing the individual to work is the whole person, and sometimes the psychological component isn't as recognized. And I appreciate you bringing some of those strategies forward and how you're recognizing that. Robin, have you seen similar challenges for employees and the team around them? And how has that affected their work performance and the business overall?
Well, it's hard to talk about people in the workplace without really recognizing what COVID has happened to the employer in the last 2 years. So we have had to respond in ways that we never have before. And there's been real macro and micro levels to people and their needs and their requirements from a psychological health standpoint. So if you look at what those macro things that have happened, so first we had, the remote work that happened. So we've sent people home to where they are isolated in their homes. They have different work situations where there could be improved workplace life balance, but in some, that's not the truth in every case. So not everyone's home is as welcoming to having working from home situations. And really, for the first time that I can remember in my career, we are now looking at a situation where it's not about the workplace, people's health and their safety and their mental well-being. The employer has to look inside their homes now and care about what's happening inside those homes. We also have a really big work on-site group. They are very multicultural. For the last 2 years, they've not been able to fly home to visit their families and their friends and have the normal supports that they would have had in their usual, beat of their year. So there's a lot of isolation. And even in our workplace, we isolated people for so long. Even think about, we don't have that normal connection with people at the water cooler anymore. Or it's not the same. Even people where used to sit and have coffee together, they're very much isolated by barriers, and it's been space and 6 feet. So it creates a really different engagement with people over a space. So that's a legacy that I think for all employers that we've really had to grapple with. And I think that the reality is that we can't just be concerned about our workplace. We really have to look after the whole person. We have to understand what's going on in their private lives, because it really is affecting their personal and their work life and their ability to perform and to be a great performer on our team. So I would say in the last 2 years, we've had to think differently about mental wellness for sure.
Certainly the last 2 years have been extraordinary, and really looking at how do we apply and adapt our workplaces, thinking differently to support people is definitely what we're all, wrestling with, in this new normal. Merv, what are some of the other types of psychological health concerns that are surfacing in businesses? And based on your research and practice, why do you believe workplace health and psychological safety is becoming such an important consideration?
Great question, and it's an ongoing issue. And before I even get into that, I would like to make the point that language matters in this domain a great deal. We talk about mental health, but often we talk about mental health for actually code words for mental illness. And so I like the phrase and the fact that this is reflection in committees and the national standard to talk about psychological health and safeties. Again, try as we might, mental health ends up being mental illness, and mental illness often in the public mind. Next time we see some kind of public event and so on, we hear comments like mental health may be involved, and our mind goes to serious and persistent mental illness, which is not the issue in workplaces. So talking about psychological health allows the whole continuum from a psychiatric disorder through to struggles in the workplace, through to thriving and doing well. And it allows us to have that whole continuum. So I do think that's important. As to why this is emerging, well, I think there's a whole bunch of reasons. I think work has changed. Back injuries, musculoskeletal injuries used to be the main cause of a disability and illness and so on. We used to put our back into it. These days, we're putting our head into it. And correspondingly, we're seeing things like depression and anxiety as when there is a diagnosis required. Those are the leading diagnoses that are often attached to qualify for disability. And the other one, and certainly a big one, and we're seeing this in legislation from WorkSafe BC and other compensation boards across the country, is post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's become a real issue. I also think workers have changed. Workers, different generations and so on, as mentioned, COVID and so on. Workers are expecting a workplace where they can feel safe, where they can feel respected. And as we spend so much of our time at work, the work environment becomes a critical variable that we can influence for better or worse.
So certainly workplace health and psychological safety is becoming an important consideration for many reasons. But looking at the language and I guess getting better adapted using it which isn't easy, because we know that we have to self-reflect on what we say, and there, for this and many other reasons, a challenge. Let's move into really looking at incident response. An effective psychological health program for the workplace needs to plan for both incident response and prevention. Let's shift into the discussion to prevention in a few minutes. But first, starting with you, Kelly, where does your employee assistance program fit into your approach to addressing the needs of employees who are already dealing with psychological health challenges? Do you have any advice on rolling out an EAP program and encouraging employees to use the resources?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Our EAP program is really only one part of our approach. At FlexiForce, we're doing a lot to invest in our culture and making the work environment, both physical and otherwise, work for us. Keeping an open door at all levels and having enhanced sick time and leave policies, along with a good benefit plan. The EAP really came about because of COVID mostly, and everybody in the news was talking about mental health. We were feeling the stress of becoming crisis coordinators ourselves for situations that we had never managed before. We were sharing these resources, but after a few surveys with our people and really getting a chance to connect with them once they were home and or working in the factory, we realized that we needed to add some more to our program. So the Employee Assistance Program through Homewood Health has an annual cost for us of less than $6,500 a year. So it was really a no-brainer. It's less than $3 a month per employee, depending on your business size. And that provided access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, both online, over the phone, for any life challenges, whether they were crisis or not. The fact that it was 100% confidential was a bonus. The other thing that we really recognized about EAP as well is that they have some add-ons where they can help HR and managers when there's intervention required, because we're not the experts. We have to deal with the work situation, and the personal situation still needs help, but we're not qualified to give that help in all cases. So that's kind of really where it comes into our philosophy. When it came to rolling it out, Homewood gave us all of the resources, so it was really quite easy. There was tons of different types of posters that you could pick and choose from. There was communication letters that we were able to cut and paste into newsletters. We didn't just put up a newsletter or a poster on the wall. We put it as a regular banner spot in our newsletter. We put them on doors, in hallways, lunchrooms, even private areas like washroom stalls where people might, be thinking differently. We communicated about the app, the online resources, and the 1-800 number. And then we've added things into our performance letters or other documentation to employees to remind them of the resource. So when we know that there's an issue going on, we're immediately being able to give them some resources to say, look, you should call these people. They can help you. We have to focus on the work side of things. And then lastly, we educated our supervisors and the managers about the resource so that they could have the conversations with the teams themselves.
So it's much more than just signing up to an EP program. It's doing your homework around making sure it's the right program, has the right tools and resources for your organization, and then creating a culture of using those resources when you need them. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Robin, where psychological health concern is impacting an employee's performance, what are some early steps employers can take to intercede?
There's a lot of things, and I appreciate Kelly's comments about EAP. We have an EAP program. It's a really important tool in the toolbox to have that supports people and they can get immediate assistance. So number one, that's just a great resource. For us, I think that it goes back a little bit further in the process that we have to establish trust amongst our team members. And so we've done some really subtle things just from the get-go. So one was we were a traditional HR department. We have rebranded HR. We are now People and Wellness. When I was hiring our team to support, we didn't hire HR generalists. We transformed that title of the position to be a people champion. So I was really trying to put in place a culture that establishes trust and that we can have, more meaningful dialogue with our people that doesn't feel that it's punitive or they're going to be in trouble or all those things which that traditional HR kind of title comes with. So it's a more open dialogue that we're trying to establish so that people can bring forward their concerns and they have a trusted source. And again, like Kelly said, we're not experts and we're really put in a situation sometimes where we are asked to be, and we do. And we have to be clear about it. Our role is to help bridge what we know and what's going on to help that identification with the resources that's going to help them. So the other thing that we've really attempted to do is to balance my team. And when I do the hiring of my team, there really has to be that empathetic element to our frontline people managers who are helping with our people team. So that, and it's not something that I'm very intuitive about, and I know that about myself. So I really balance my team by having some really smart, intelligent, intuitive people who go and make that difference for people. So if we're starting to notice that we have teams that aren't functioning or somebody just isn't off or we've got poor absenteeism, our first approach is to go and just talk to them. And, it always goes back. Sometimes we just don't talk enough. We don't ask enough questions. We're not asking the right questions. We feel like it's not our place. We're embarrassed. It's going to be too personal. So we are kind of normalizing those conversations with people to say that, and it's not like we want to know about their private lives, but if there's something impacting how they are showing up at work, we certainly want to know. We want to be of assistance to that. If people aren't comfortable sharing, that's fine. But we want them to know that we can be an ally for them. And that's very much our stance, is caring is sharing. And it's a part of our culture and our mission statement at Epicure is that we put people first. And the more that we demonstrate that we care about them, the more that we establish trust and they will support themselves and ultimately the organization.
So creating that bridge, allowing employees to feel comfortable going through the door that is open, as you mentioned, the People and Wellness being a new name that really, again, to Merv's point on language, more friendly, more open, more enabling. I think, really good points and steps. Merv, eventually an employee's psychological health situation may reach a critical point. What can an employer do to make sure managers and supervisors know how to respond to a psychological issue that requires immediate action?
Well, I can only re-emphasize what both Robin and Kelly said in some ways. It is about a conversation. I'm going to be a little hard-nosed here and remember that within the parameter of the employment of employer-employee relationship and so on, our purview, your purview is their performance, their functioning at work. Their personal life, other matters are an employee's, any employees, personal and stuff. If they choose to bring issues up, great. But I think the key thing is that conversation. And without being overly scripted, something like acknowledging that the individual has been a very valued and sincerely appreciated worker, and you've noticed a change in behavior. Some way or another and so on. And this is of concern, whatever it may be. And frankly, if it's a crisis point, it may have been there's a blow up. There may be significant conflict. There may have been some pretty heavy duty stuff and so on. And there is a responsibility to kind of address those issues. But to make the employee aware that you are concerned, there are resources available. EAP is necessary, but I don't think sufficient in its own right and so on. And to create an opportunity for follow-up conversations. I do think, and training was mentioned, there's not a lot of kind of high quality research in the area because this kind of applied research is difficult to do. But a colleague of mine some years ago, one of his graduate students and he did a study with, I think it was Bell Alliance back in the Maritimes. And what they did is run a training program for managers on how to respond to someone who may be struggling. The outcome wasn't a reduction in the number of LTD, but the duration of LTD went down. And it went down largely because managers, supervisors, and to Robin's point, felt comfortable having a conversation. It's often pointed out that if someone's off because they're having a new baby or because they have an injury or because they or a family member has COVID, there's phone calls, there's letters. Often when people are off on stress leave, and by the way, there is no such thing as stress leave per se within most agreements. When someone's off work, often they lose connection. They lose connection with their colleagues, they lose connection with the workplace and so on, which does not bode well for your mental health. So maintaining that connection, maintaining that conversations with realistic expectations of all parties, including the employer, making things available.
Thank you, Mervyn. You mentioned a really important point, looking at changes in behavior as being observant to be able to see that, and then having the training to be able to recognize that. All important pieces in the puzzle to kind of connect individuals with the resources. It's not just an automatic connection point. So thank you.
And if I could add one point to that, interestingly, I appreciate that small employers, this is a struggle. They may not have an HR department. They don't have some of the resources. However, smaller employers often are more nimble. They may have a closer relationship with employees. They know that Bill has got some family issues going on and so on. So there are actually some doors open when there is that relationship that may not be as open in large organizations where things get deferred off to another department.
No, you're absolutely right. Smaller organizations have the luxury of knowing individuals, closely, right? Large organizations have the challenges with the several levels that maybe the CEO may never see the frontline workers. So all kinds of different challenges for different sizes of organizations in this area for sure.
Exactly.
So moving now into the prevention realm, with psychological health claims on the rise, employers are looking for proactive, and you talked a little bit about some of those proactive strategies, but looking at ways to build a supportive work culture. And it's certainly an easy word to say, but a lot more challenging to do and to maintain. Robin, what steps are you taking now to support mental health and wellness among your teams? Where do you think employers who don't currently have any should start?
I think the foundational piece is your safety program. So if I can prove as an employer that I am accountable and I demonstrate that your physical safety is important on site, I also need to take that same approach about psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And if we establish, and people are more comfortable with their physical ailments, if they have a broken limb, we understand immediately that they have a broken leg. We don't let them walk around with a bit broken leg. So it's a little bit more nuanced when we talk about the psychological safety because people aren't as comfortable talking about it. And so one is really reducing our stigma around it, making it a part of our conversation that people feel open to have that dialogue. But safety, for sure, their safety is safety in both aspects, whether it's your physical or your psychological. So number one is just a really strong safety system that we catch both types of injuries, and that we treat them with equal importance. And I think that that's really important. Again, it goes back to creating a culture of trust, and we want to respect and be very, very ethical when we're talking about those things. And people in wellness teams or HR teams or safety teams have to really, really be so cautious about privacy, and so that we're not breaking trust at any point of that transaction, because we have a contract. This is a psychological contract with our people, and we just cannot afford to break it. And it only takes one to ruin your reputation as that caring employer. So it's really important that we treat every individual very, very uniquely. And I think that the other thing that I would say is lean in. Like, the harder things get and the more that we have instances, and I was the same, we had a lot of repetitive strain injuries and with my previous employer. And guess what? We went and hired people and professionals to do ergonomics, and we did different things because we could take that safety situation out of our work site. It's the same thing here. I need to lean into how many resources are needed, how I interface, how I support our people, and we need to have better ways of doing that. So there's still a lot of evolution about how we do that in our workplace, but it can be small things. And as I said earlier, we've got a really multicultural organization. Small things like our people and wellness team wouldn't put out international snacks for the group that we have working on a particular day. And it's small care and concerns add up to a lot at the end of the day. And it's, if you can look after a small aspect of their personal health and their person that we have an interest in you, I think it reflects and it just creates that trust over time.
So you mentioned a number of good points, Robin, really looking at how can we integrate the psychological component within our prevention strategy. You mentioned ergonomics or other types of risks that you could consider the psychological risks associated with tasks, so that we're doing this on a regular basis, and it becomes a more often or common observation in our incident investigations, in our inspections, all these components that we need to get better at incorporating within the DNA of our safety program. So really excellent points. Kelly, now, where are some areas where you're considering potential new programs to support the well-being of your team? And what information or resources would help your management team in the process?
Well, at FlexiForce, we have a goal, and we talk about it all the time about becoming one of Canada's top 100. So I think a lot of what Robin had to say about really leaning in and working with people and understanding things and focusing on culture, as well as we want to challenge for our OC certification. So strengthening those, not just the culture, but the HR and safety policies. And I think most of our management team, if not all of them, have really taken let's be a best practice employer wherever we can. So going above and beyond to try to accommodate is really where we're going to continually grow. As far as new programs, we don't really have it all mapped out yet, but we've talked about some wellness initiatives and how we include that with our new hybrid workforce and how we're connecting with those people, not just the people we see face to face. We want to continue to leverage our support from the health and safety team and make sure that they get some training. And then obviously our frontline leaders and really teaching them how to have the conversation about psychological safety and mental health in the workplace. And, you know, I attend many of your webinars, Lisa, and we're still learning. I'll continue to do that. So any resources that you can offer us, we'll continue to take and learn.
Thank you, Kelly. And certainly every level within the organization has, you know, has responsibility in making sure and shaping the culture of an organization, and in particular, this area that's evolving, as you mentioned. So really great to hear that you are doing a number of things to support that, because again, we're continuing to help create new resources as well to help support all of the different levels of management that play a critical role in shaping the culture of our organizations. Merv, what can employers and employees do collaboratively to create a psychologically healthy workplace and support the psychological health and well-being of the team? Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think one of the first things you can do, as you would in any health and safety program, is look at the risks. You have to do a proper assessment of what the risks and hazards are in our workplace, strengths as well as areas of concern. And there are a number of tools out there. Guarding Minds at Work, which my colleagues and I developed some years ago, is one that's very common referred to. There are others as well. Dr. Graham Lowe and I have worked on creating kind of a brief measure, which is called Psychologically Healthy Pulse Tool. So get an assessment, get a picture of how your employees perceive the organization's efforts to identify and address risks in the workplace. And if people are familiar with the national standard, that identifies 13 psychosocial risk factors, which actually came from Guarding Minds at Work. So get a picture, get a snapshot of where your issues are, because that will give you an area to focus. And the other thing that really is critical and has been mentioned is talk to the people, talk to workers, work together on that. Your employees, your staff will have some very, very good ideas about practical, sensible things that would be helpful. Certainly incorporate psychological health and safety into your OH&S committees, your wellness committees in that sense. Some large organizations have created psychological health and safety officers. They've actually formalized that position, and keep the conversation going. As pointed out, we are learning. It's been, 100 odd years and so on that we've been addressing occupational health and safety in this country. This has been about 20 years. So we are learning, we're learning together, and we'll continue to grow and move forward.
Thank you, Merv. And to all of our panelists today, a connection like these are critical in working together to support needs for industry. And today has been a step forward towards aligning our strategies and resources to support employers. So now we begin inviting the audience to ask some questions in our Q&A period that were pre-submitted by attendees. So starting with you, Merv, I have a question on, do you have any recommendations on how to assess or even measure psychological well-being in the workplace?
Well, it's a very good, very, very good question. Now, if we're talking about psychological well-being of employees, there are measures out there. There are measures of anxiety, depression, there are measures of thriving and resilience. There's a lot of those tools. I think there's merit in those things, but also considerable caution, both liability issues and so on. If you're going to do a mass screening, for example, of depression, I think you have a ethical and probably legal responsibility to respond to those. Someone indicates, for example, that they are suicidal, courtesy of your measure. So be thoughtful on those kind of things. If we're talking at a global kind of level, however, and so on, I think there are questions you can generally ask about job experiences, job expectations. Robin made the mention earlier about this notion of a psychological contract. I was delighted to hear that, because it's an interesting construct out there that I don't think gets enough attention. And the idea is psychological contract is just the implicit understanding between an employer and employee. Not part of a union agreement, not part of a contract, probably unspoken. Neither party has never necessarily articulated what their expectations are of one another. And I think that conversation, making the implicit a little bit more explicit, does give you a much better sense of well-being and how psychological well-being is. So I think we can ask those questions and so on. I think we can do those surveys, but be very thoughtful in how we use them.
Thank you, Merv. You talked about the psychological contract. Is there key questions in that needs to be included? Do you have any thoughts on what that might look like?
Well, yeah, sure. I think from the employer's perspective, I think in my expectation of employee is that you will do your job, you will be honest and authentic about it. And at times when there are workload issues or challenges, you're willing to step up, to step in, and so on. From an employee's perspective, I expect to be respected. I expect to be heard. I expect the employer to appreciate that I have a personal life. This work is not my entire life. And if I have a personal issue, a family issue, and so on, to have a little bit of slack on that, going back and forth. And again, because this stuff is unspoken, if either parties breaks that agreement, you may not even know you broke it and so on, the result can be, frankly, the good news might be that someone says, I'm out of here to some extent. The bad news may be, I'm going to stick here, but I'm not going to do one iota more than I need to do. I'm going to stick exactly to my workload. And on the employer side is, okay, you didn't step up and so on, fine. We don't have grounds for any kind of dismissal and so on, but you're being glass ceilinged. We're also going to keep you in your place, and we're not going to give you any opportunities of growth, and so on and so on. So again, I think asking those kind of questions and getting the answers there will help.
Thank you, Merv. Now, a question to both you, Robin, and Kelly. Starting with you, Robin, what kind of employee support programs have been or being developed and implemented to cope with the new normal? And you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but anything in specific to help adapt based on our current changing environment, Robin?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're at the new normal yet. So, I very much feel like we're still pivoting and responding to a new organizational world. So I think that what we have to be is in the ready position. I think we've learned a lot over the last 2 years. I think that the tone for sure of communication has changed with employees, and that we've learned a lot about how we communicate. And my experience has been, because I've written a lot of memos over the last 2.5 years, is that we had to strike a different chord. And because there were so many changes, and how do you get people to evolve with you through change? And the number one way of doing that is communication. And the quicker way to do that is communicate to them and communicate from your heart. And I think organizations over, a couple of decades have really changed to being, and not all organizations for sure, but they're, we've gone to a very cultured, professional place. And I think we have to start to go the other direction, which is an evolution, but all things evolve. And I think that caring, sensitive, ethically correct aspect of the organization has to come out and be at the forefront, and be unashamed about it as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, communication is a critical piece, and there's so many ways to communicate. To your point, what mechanism do you use at the right time? It's really, and you don't always select the right way, right? We all make mistakes, and I think that's a reality. And as we evolve through this period, what are your thoughts, Kelly, on this question?
I much like Robin, I don't think there's a new normal yet. I think it's continuing to evolve. We're learning more every day. We're watching what other employers are doing and, talking to our people. So I don't know that I have the perfect answer for it. We've tried to empower our frontline supervisors and leads a little bit more to get into certain conversations. We've definitely spent a lot of time working through our health and safety team and just making that word health stick out in the safety. It's not just about the physical side. The EAP was a new offering for us last year, so we're continuing to use that. We've tried some of their fitness at work assessment tools and things and whatnot. So it's an evolution, and I think we'll continue to have this discussion for a long time. As far as the working at home, we definitely are looking for better ways. We implemented Microsoft Teams so we can have more video chats and things like that. We've upgraded some phone systems. There's lots of good stuff happening, but to Merv's point earlier, it's never enough, right?
No, and we're constantly learning in this technological and real environment that we live in when you're manufacturing products. So looking at another aligned important area is trust. How can we establish trust and encourage employees to view managers and supervisors as allies when they do need support. Is there any takeaways that you can share with us on your successes around that? And maybe starting with you, Kelly.
I think it all comes back to that conversation again, to be honest. And I don't know that I'll be able to articulate it well, but really just having the conversation and getting to know what an employee needs and focusing on how that's affecting their work and what we can do about that situation while still getting them some support, you know. I'm not sure, Lisa. I think that might be all I have for you on that one.
It's hard. I don't think it's the same, one size fits all. I don't know. You know, it's many things to many people, right? Your thoughts, Robin, on this, and then I'll invite Merv to comment as well.
I am a big fan of changing the environment. Walk and talk is a great way of sort of disarming people, especially in really sensitive or situations where they might feel defensive, and bringing people into an office and closing the door just heightens all of that when you're really trying to make a connection. So yeah, big fan of, hey, let's go and have a walk around the block. And it's fresh air and it's distracting, and it takes the us against them sort of corporate versus employee out. And I think that, again, it's really showing concerns about the things that people feel comfortable bringing to the table. And then that relationship expands over time as well. So, and I can't tell you how many times I've had someone that came in with an initial injury that was dealt with through the proper channels. And then the more we talk to them and, oh, well, my eyes weren't on task. And, well, why were you injured? And, you know, and it comes to, well, I've got a lot of things going on at home and and then we kind of get into a larger discussion. So, but yeah, I think that just really being so conscious of what it feels like to be on the employee side and talking to your employer. And it's hard, you know, that's a challenging place to be, and people fear shame and retribution. So we really want to try and change the environment of which we're talking to people.
No, it's definitely not easy. Like you mentioned, you know, supervisors and managers have the workload and all the other stresses around, you know, supply chain, labor shortages. And then at the same time, you have to be, you know, thoughtful in how you communicate and look at some of the challenges or struggles that your team are having. So it definitely, you know, hearing that it's not easy. Merv, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think trust is absolutely critical. And I think there's a casualty of the pandemic and pandemic restrictions is trust. Trust in one another, trust in science, trust in our employer, so on. I think that's a real issue. I mentioned guarding minds at work earlier. We did an analysis of some of the items, and the one item, employees and management trust one another, correlated with most of the other psychosocial risk factors. So trust really is a key variable here. How do you build or how do you maintain trust? I think if you've lost it, it's hard to build it back. There's a intro psych 101 kind of principle. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if you've broken it, basically it's the proof is in action. If you have demonstrated respect, courtesy, a degree of humility, and so on, I think you will earn that trust and maintain that trust and so on. So be authentic. I think during the early stages of pandemic, the phrase "we're all in this together" got a little bit tiresome because it wasn't true. Some were in this a lot deeper than others. So being real, being authentic, being helpful, not just casual, we're all go team kind of thing, but being very realistic. It might be pointing out, here is a link to our EAP. Here is a helpful kind of resource. Being respectful also in terms of people's times. And there have been questions, we've talked about communication as well. Being very clear about what expectations are with communication, especially when people are working from home. I worked with an organization a number of years ago, it was actually Canada Origin Housing, and one of their senior leaders had a policy which he made explicit, and I've not seen this elsewhere, where he said, essentially, I will respond to emails between such and such a time, say 10, 11 every day, so on. I will not bug you after work hours. don't expect a result from me and so on. I will get back to you and so on. If there is a crisis, get in touch with me. But setting some limiters and parameters about how we communicate with each other and keeping that communication helpful. I think those are the kind of things which build and maintain trust. And a last comment, because we've talked about managers and supervisors as if they're on the other side. There's lots of research that managers and supervisors, like all of us, are by no means exempt of the psychological hazards, psychological stress in the workplace. And in many cases, it can be harder on them because they're kind of stuck in the middle.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a critical point, Merv. You know, they are people like everyone else, right? We suffer the same challenges and at times have, you know, a larger level of expectation because they're in that role when they can suffer the same as anyone else. Looking at small business, there's a question about, you know, what would you do to recommend getting a small business owner online to open these discussions? What would that first step look like? Merv, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of action in this area actually came from personal experience. And quite frankly, all of us know someone or maybe ourselves and so on with who's had mental health or psychological health struggles. So some identification and so on brings it home. Again, I worked with an organization some years ago, a heavy construction industry company up north, and one of their employees was driving a heavy piece of equipment, forklift and so on. His son had died like 3 days before from suicide, and he'd come back to work. There was a fatal accident. And one of his colleagues made a statement. I looked in his eyes, but there was no one there. So like so many things, it takes personal experience that kind of brings people to the table. So on. I think that it is important to do mental health awareness. There are lots of those kind of programs out there. I'm a little cautious in those because we're not trying to train people to be psychologists, psychiatrists, or physicians to assess and so on. But greater awareness will certainly help. And I think pointing out that there are benefits, not just economic benefits, but certainly, especially in the current age, recruitment, retention kind of benefits to paying attention to these issues, becoming a trusted employer.
Yeah, no, lots of things. Thank you, Merv. Robin, your thoughts, and how do we get better at assessing psychological risks in your prevention strategy? How do we get better at it? What do we need to do?
I don't know if we're going to get better at it because we're not trained to that's not our expertise. I think that we will get better at the conversation. I think we will get better at getting more resources to people quicker. And I think that we will get better at identifying risks earlier. But it's also, we have to look at it as they're all going to be unique situations that all have to be handled with a really nimble mindset. And what I would is that we just have to keep that nimbleness and our curiosity and our wanting to do best by our people really close to our hearts so that we're motivated to do something about it. And so that's where I really come from on that, is that I don't want to be an expert. I'd rather not be an expert, but we do have to respond, and we have to respond well. And I think we have to do so in a really high integrity manner.
Your thoughts on this, Kelly?
Well, you asked the question around small employers and where they could start. And, you know, I think one of the main HR policies that would help is a fitness to work policy. It's sort of replaced the old drug and alcohol substance abuse policies in the workplace, and then incorporated things around how you were feeling and more around, what are medical prescriptions and all that kind of stuff. There's so much that goes into a fitness at work. And if you're overtired and you can't focus on your job, you shouldn't be at work. So I think having good attendance policies and good sick time or leave options kind of start that conversation, especially when you focus on a safety thing like you're not fit to drive a forklift or, whatever that might look like for your business.
No, I think that's excellent. Having expectations, because when the behavior change is observed, you can cite them and say, look, this is the expectations. And then we're seeing a divergence from that. So why, and really understanding the why, so that you can get to potentially resources to them if that's the case. Another question to you, Merv. In talking about the types of training, what do you think is the most effective, or some of the leading training programs most valuable to managers and supervisors in supporting a psychological health and safety program? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Well, certainly people may be familiar with workplace strategies for mental health and so on, which is funded, supported by Canada Life and so on. There's some great resources there. I think there's lots of good programs out there. I also think there's a lot of crappy programs out there. It's hard for me to point to one in particular. I will say, though, a more general comment, I do have a concern that a well-intentioned employer may just pick programs, if you will, off the shelf. And I think it's really important. We've learned this in our research as well as practice and so on, that a program, an intervention needs to fit the needs of the particular workplace and workplace context. For example, there's a lot of employers that are introducing mindfulness programs. Now, I'm not knocking mindfulness one little bit, but if you have identified real risks or conflict, for example, or workload issues and so on, a mindfulness program may not be helpful and may actually be perceived as being somewhat insulting, quite frankly. So really finding a good fit, doing your due diligence as you would for any health and safety kind of initiative or any initiative and so on, to find the program for which there is some evidence and does seem to fit your particular needs. And that would apply for manager training, employee training programs as well.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not easy with the wealth of programs, resources, and products out there. It's actually where we are starting as a health and safety association, is looking at ways, and we've invited yourself and Dan to help support us on this, is how do you create a tool that would help us do this, so that we can build a resource library for industry that will give them guidance on those products, because it is hard. It's definitely not an easy path forward for them. So looking at another question coming forward, what is the best way to introduce the concept of psychological health and safety to staff, as this is an emerging topic? What are some resources that employers can access to share with employees? So any first starting, I mean, again, that's another product, but another opportunity for sharing around the table. Robin, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think that it's starting to talk about it in small ways first. So if your leader is talking about anything in the business, to start to really focus and start messaging from the top down. So as we know, role models are really important, especially in organizations. So if we have the leaders talking about it, that's a great start. Empowering your teams. Secondly, to have discussions at a really bit more grassroots level, and then to provide those supports from a program basis. But my only caution is that throwing too much at employees, it gets way too overwhelming. And so the material has to be really specific, really honed in, because if not, they just start tuning out, and you were probably better off before you started talking about it. So so it's really planning it over a strategic period of time. So if it's in the next 6 months, start your leader talking about it, then introduce the training, and keep it very, very tight on message.
No, excellent points. Culture doesn't change overnight, and we need bite-sized pieces to start. They're relevant to understanding, right? Really, really important. Your thoughts on this, Kelly?
I would echo what Robin has to say, and I would just say focus on what's happening, not the feelings that are coming out as a result, right? So keep it specific on, what needs to be addressed, and keep it as much as you can on the workplace.
Another question aligned to this, really begins to speak about cultural differences. Merv, your thoughts. Do you think cultural differences can create psychological pressure on an employee? And how do you work through that?
Now we're talking about cultural in a broader context of culture, not the workplace culture, I presume. And
Yes.
yes, yeah, I mean, yes, people who don't understand one another often disagree with one another. Disagreement leads to conflict. So I think that Robin's comments earlier with the diverse workforce and so on about reflecting that in what food is available and something like that really does help in introducing language. So sure, cultural difference, certainly concerns about diversity and inclusion and equity are critical at multiple levels right now. And for that very reason. So I do think makes a difference. And if I can add sort of a side comment to all of this as well is I do think it's important. It's hard, but I think it's important to evaluate your programs as best you can. Are they making a difference? And it's tricky because the indicators, the lagging indicators like disability rates, EAP utilization, and so on, are lagging indicators to some extent. So trying to evaluate what you're doing to find out if it works. Ask people, is this helpful?
No, exactly. Evaluation is critical, for continual improvement.
Right.
If we know we're going ahead, we want to make sure that we evaluate what we're doing right now. Excellent points. So Kelly mentioned some warning signs they watch for at FlexiForce. Robin, Merv, what are some of other signs employers should look for that someone needs support? Starting with you, Merv.
Well, the big one's been changes in behavior. They may be changes in appearance, changes in performance, changes in interaction. Someone who is formerly gregarious and outgoing and so on is much more withdrawn. Again, not intruding on individuals' privacy, but those are kind of behaviors you're going to see. Again, your responsibility as an employer to focus on observable behaviors, observable performance in that sense. I think those kind of things are the opportunity for that conversation to occur. So on. Certainly issues like conflict, which is often the kind of linchpin that something's going on, something to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Merv. Your thoughts, Robin?
I'm going to let the doctor answer that question because that's probably the appropriate answer. But I just want to go back to the cultural piece. And an example I want to give on that was, so very, very few English speaking people in our warehouse environment. And a team member of mine, she went out and she has contacted family members to do translation. She has gone out, she's written letters with her personal phone number to make sure that we have, because we're trying to give new safety information. We're not sure if they understand us. So really just that personal touch on the language, on the culture. And because I think often that's just so isolating when you don't speak up because you're just concerned that no one is listening or caring, but really it's just a translation issue, and translation issues can be dealt with. So really focusing on any barrier that is preventing a communication, that we're missing an opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you all. We certainly have a lot of work to do in this area, but really this is the starting point of coming together, having the conversation, and then piecing together resources to help support all of us move forward in this important area. Thank you again to all of you. We're privileged to have you with us today, and to all of you in the audience, thank you for participating. If we didn't get to your question, we'll do our best to respond to them in a follow-up. We invite you in May to join us again, May 10th, for best practices on setting up a Recover at Work program, and on May 26th with leaders in government and industry as we discuss key workforce strategy decisions to address the labor crisis. Visit us online for information and resources you need, or to reach out to safety advice or training. Thank you all for joining us today. Please check your inbox for a survey link to share your feedback and suggestions to help us improve future webinars. You'll also see a link to a short survey seeking information on what your organization is currently doing or would like to do in the area of workplace mental health. No more than 5 to 10 minutes of your time. This survey will help us understand how we can best support you. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.